All right, well, it's 12 o'clock, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. And as more folks come in, we'll let them in. Um, but we have, yeah, lots of folks here and lots to get through today. Uh, Thank you all for joining us on this at least very Wisconsin and it sounds like East Coast rainy day. Uh, and we are really excited because today is the very first what we're calling Whitburn plus WISACT Wednesday event. My name is Sam Larson. For folks who don't know me, I'm the interim director of the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. And as I think a lot of our WISAC members know, or we've been sending kind of a notification about this out in the newsletter, the Whitburn Center was recently handed the reins by WISAC's co-founders, David Haynes, and I just saw, I think, David come on. So David Haynes and former Governor Scott McCallum back in March. They've been very gracious in helping with the transition for our meetings in March and April, but today we are officially kind of combining and kicking off things with Whitburn plus WISACT. And I want to give another round of thanks to David and Scott for really trusting us and supporting us to take the baton from them and really continue this work. Very important work. We're really excited about it. And also express thanks to Nathan Stock from the Carter Center because they've been continuing to support us in this capacity too. So we're excited about that. David, I know you just joined, but I'm going to just offer, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say before we continue today.
Well, hi, Sam, and hello, everyone. We are really pleased to be working with Whitburn. It's such a good fit. Scott and I worked really hard for over a year to try to build the organization and get it to a point where an organization like Whitburn can take it to the next level, and we think that's going to happen. So we're excited. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm also just going to put in the chat here for folks the link to WISACT on the Whitburn website. So for anybody who's interested in learning more or joining WISACT, for folks who have previously been with us through the Whitburn Center, that's there for you, and we'd love you to take a closer look at the work that we're continuing to do. Again, this is our first joint event, which works out really well. It's almost like the stars aligned for us because the Whitburn Center has actually been hosting monthly Wednesday events for the past 3 years or so. And so it's just a nice kind of blend to do this together. And before we get started, I'm going to hand things over to Lisa Lewis, our administrative manager, to share a little bit about the event and our logistics for today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our first Whitburn plus WISAC Wednesday event. I'm Lisa Lewis, the Administrative Manager at the Whitburn Center. Please note that today's session will be recorded and will be available on the Whitburn Center's website and YouTube channel. Please keep your mics muted. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end. And a quick overview of who we are. Founded in 2021 through a generous gift from UWO alumni Jerry Whitburn, the center conducts nonpartisan practical research to improve governance and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our goal is to strengthen local government, nonprofits, and communities by bringing people together to share knowledge and provide tools to support the public sector. And now I'll turn things back to Dr. Sam Larson, and she will introduce our panelists and moderate our discussion.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So since the Whitburn Center is part of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and of course the Universities of Wisconsin system, we thought that maybe today would be a good time to introduce you to some of the leaders and students in the UW system who have been doing a lot of work in this space of kind of cultivating and strengthening their leadership skills, their civic muscles, and taking part in dialogues and facilitating dialogues across political perspectives, and really creating kind of more what I would say intentional space for viewpoint diversity on our campuses. So our event today is called How UW Students Are Building Their Civic Muscles, From Bridging the Divide to the Pluralist Lab. And we're highlighting two programs that have had participation from UW Oshkosh, but also other UW institutions across the state. So one, Bridging the Divide, which is a program of the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership, and then the Pluralist Lab, which originally was a program of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. There's been some recent changes changes to that. So Devin might tell us a little bit about that today. And then they've had really national reach across a number of universities across the US. So they've essentially brought that program to the UW system this past year. So we'll talk a bit about that and hear from some students who participated in that. We have 4 panelists today that, again, I know will have a lot to share. So I'm just going to kick things off and actually ask them to introduce themselves. So for our panel, we have Devin Scanlon, Mike Leader, Olivia Magigrano, and I think that Gabe Murray is still here. There you are, Gabe, on my screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and call on each of you. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to folks, let us know your name, title, your organization, for students, your academic major or program, and then tell us a little bit about, how you've been involved in either Bridging the Divide or the Pluralist Lab as either a facilitator, participant, or what have you. So I'm going to invite our out-of-state guests to kick things off. Devin, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. My name is Devin Scanlon. I'm the executive director for the Pluralist Lab, which, as Sam said, started at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, and is now launched from the nest and is its own independent 501(c)(3) organization, bringing our programming to more places than we were able to do when we were at Mercatus, where we were focused primarily on higher education, bringing it to K through 12 spaces, local community events, and other places outside of just academia to try to really lean into the idea of pluralism to get multiple perspectives. I got started on this when I was working at Mercatus because in a lot of our different fellowships and different programming that we had, students came in, had great conversations, and then would say things like, "Wow, I wish I could do something like this on my campus." But the culture or the climate that they're in made them feel like they weren't allowed to necessarily always share all of their true beliefs, whether that was self-censoring or the feel of the need to censor other people when certain ideas came up. And so I was part of a team that started putting together different pilot programs on different ways that we could try to help with that. And eventually the Pluralist Lab launched with basically 2 different formats. One that's a smaller type of half-day program that's more scalable, and then a larger forum format where we bring in a panel of different people who come from different fields of study, some practitioners and some academics, and also with the idea of them coming from different worldviews, with also the idea there of it being more than 2 people on the panel, to try to get out of false binaries and really try to think about the full spectrum of different ways people think about different topics.
Great. Thanks, Devin. I think next I'll have our 2 students who were involved in the Pluralist Lab this year introduce themselves. So Gabe, would you mind going first?
Sure. My name is Gabe Murray. I'm an MPA student with UW Oshkosh. I just got done with my first kind of school year of the MPA program. So I have a month off before I take my first summer class. So I attended the Pluralist Lab, I think in late February, early March, I think was the date. And I thought it was fun, and I thought this would be a good follow-up for me to attend and share my thoughts on it. So.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. And Liv?
Hi, I'm Olivia. I recently gained alumni status from UWO, so that's fun. With my degree in sociology, and emphasis in public administration. During my time at Oshkosh, I served as the president of Sociology Club, and then I also interned for the Whitburn Center, my whole entire senior year, which was really great. And then I also was involved with Bridging the Divide in the Pluralist Lab. So first with the Pluralist Lab as a participant, and then as later on as a facilitator in the late February session that Gabe just talked about, as well as working with WISAC to support civic learning and dialogue-based programs. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Liv. And then Mike Leader, our last guest who will be representing Bridging the Divide. So Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mike Leader. I'm the director of the Center for Civic and Community Engagement at UW Oshkosh, but I also work with the Thompson Center. I'm hired by the Thompson Center to do a variety of things, but primarily run the Bridging the Divide program across the 13 UW campuses. So we have campus leaders housed at every single UW, and they implement Bridging the Divide on those campuses, and I work as their primary contact for those events.
Great. Thank you all for your introduction. So the next question I want to ask, Mike, maybe I'll start with you since you introduced yourself last. Really, I was hoping you and Devin could provide kind of a brief overview of Bridging the Divide and the Pluralist Lab. You've told us a little bit about it, but can you tell us, what inspired you to get involved with that initiative? And then tell us kind of what are some of the main goals and then maybe some outcomes that you've seen since you've been involved in kind of building these things up?
Yeah, I love Bridging the Divide. I'm originally a communication undergrad, so like this idea of being able to talk to each other is so valuable to me. And also then a student affairs professional, so I really started my work in universities and student affairs and working in housing. And just that idea of bringing people together for community and conversation has always been a part of my work. So being able to do this in a really professional capacity across the system to improve hopefully the state of politics and the state of just everything and community at our UWs and across the broader part of the state is really valuable to me. But the goal of Bridging the Divide is to reduce partisan division by fostering civil discourse among students with civic virtue, right? So we want students to come together and have conversation. What's really important to us is that this is a student-led program. So we have campus leaders at every campus who run these programs. So it's student-led, student participation, and that's really important. So it's not like an administrative thing that's being pushed to them. It's much more grassroots than that intentionally. Um, when we do these events, really, and students, they hopefully pre-register. And when they do that, they should be identifying their political identity across a multi-point scale. And that allows our campus leaders to sort them into tables intentionally so that we have some left-leaning, some right-leaning, some green, some central, whatever type students at every table to engage in the conversations that they're going to be engaging in. And then we provide a discussion guide for them to use based on whatever the conversation is that they're going to be having. So we have a whole giant list of them that the campus leaders can pick from, but then that lets them sort of dig into that conversation. We also very intentionally provide food because it's about community building, right? You need to break bread with each other, sit down and just have some general conversation. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? We always start with some icebreakers, just engage in conversation with your neighbors, with your community first, and then get into whatever the conversation topics may be at that particular table. So that's sort of what we're trying to do to get sort of students moving through this process and engaging in really good civil discourse. We have a slogan that we use, I think that really sums up our goals and what we're trying to do effectively. So we like to say we replace snark with conversation, tweets with real talk, and scrolls and likes with face-to-face dialogue. All things that I think our students need to just get better at. I think we all need to get a little bit better at in these days. So it's just an opportunity for students to come together and engage in these types of conversations.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I participated a bit in the Pluralist Lab. It sounds like there's some similarities there. Devin, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Pluralist Lab?
Sure. Um, so we have very similar goals, and it sounds like some similar ideas around how important breaking bread is and having like a nice chill conversation to start things off over a meal before diving into more thorny subjects. So the way that our half-day workshops work is we have them all come in for breakfast or lunch, depending on what time of the day we have it going on, and then we dive into a facilitated dialogue where we put out um, a question that we've been talking about, and then two potential answers, similar to the way that you normally hear from pollsters or the way that things are normally framed in the news media or in social media, where it's like, oh, there's only two possible ways of thinking about this, but we also offer the students the ability to have a third answer, which is both or neither, to try to get off of that spectrum as well. And so after they pick what side they're on, or saying, I think there's something good in both sides, or I think both of these options are both wrong. We then ask the students not to tell us why they picked their idea, but we engage in a theory of mind exercise to ask them why they think somebody from the other side might have picked the opposing view. With the idea there being it's so easy to have the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, if somebody disagrees with me, it must be because they're either too stupid, too misinformed, too crazy, or they're just, malign actors who are out here because they hate the country. And so what we're asking them to do is, well, think about how somebody who's just as smart, informed, well-meaning, and sane as you are, who comes to a different point of view, how they might have gotten there. And that's the way we start things off, and then we allow the conversation to kind of roll organically from there. And then bringing in these people, the folks around the table who picked both or neither, to try to bring in some more of the nuances or bring in ideas that are normally left out of the discussion in the normal way that things are framed with the binary setup that we normally have in this country. And then we wrap things up after we talk through the topics with some reflection sessions where we ask them to think through what were some of the different topics, words, phrases that really jumped out at you. And one of the things that's always really interesting is that with that is oftentimes the people around the table pick very similar phrases or have very similar reactions around certain topics. And so it's always interesting to have that kind of way for folks to reflect, take a step back, and really think about and kind of metabolize the conversation that they just had. And then finally ending the sessions with a final question of what are two things you learned and one thing you still don't know? With the things that you learned being not necessarily a fact, but oh, I never thought about it in that way, or oh, I never saw it from that perspective, or oh, that was a really interesting way of framing that, or a method or mode of thinking that they might not have been exposed to before. And the idea with the one thing I still don't know, kind of leaning into that idea of intellectual humility, and the idea of there's always more we can be thinking about on this. And also because we end with another lunch or an early snack type of dinner to again let them take these skills that they just started to build up during that conversation to then use during some downtime when it's not a facilitated conversation and they still have this question that they might want to ask somebody that they just had this conversation with in a more informal format. So that's what we do there with the goal of, similar to Mike, this idea of bottom-up cultural change, where we have partners who are both students at different universities, but also administrators, center leaders, and things like that, who are interested in bringing it to the campus. And then we do trainings with folks like Liv, so that students can also get trained in how to be a facilitator, so that it can be done in multiple places at once, and we can try to scale this as a catalyst for sustainable cultural change. That's our main offering, but we also do a second one that I mentioned earlier, which is our Pluralist Lab Fora, which leans more into diving deeper into the nuances of a topic, where we invite at least four different experts. Sometimes we've had up to six, where the topic really required even more nuance because there were so many different competing views that maybe aren't normally heard. And those are normally over 2 days, where we invite them we start with a definitions exercise where we ask the students to define some important concepts, because one of our theories there is, well, oftentimes we're just talking past each other. We're using the same words, but we're meaning very different things by them. And so setting the stage like that and trying to understand the different ways that we use language, and then doing the same thing with our experts in a panel discussion, and then from there going into more concrete example areas within the larger topic. And then ending with what we call an ideological Turing test. You might know the Turing test in computing sciences, where can a computer trick you into thinking that it's a real person? With the ideological Turing test, it's, are you an ideological robot, or are you able to express the other side's views so well that the person who actually holds those views would say, I couldn't have said it better myself. Um, And with both of these, that bottom-up cultural change we're trying to see, we've been seeing some good results in terms of people reporting a greater willingness and a feeling of a greater ability to have tough discussions across these divides. And I think it's that combination there of I'm able, but also I need to be willing to go out and have these conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin, for that overview. So Gabe and Liv, you both participated in this. You were courageous enough to step into the room and have these conversations. And one thing that I want to highlight that Devin mentioned is really that important piece within the Pluralist Lab of gaining kind of this perspective or understanding a perspective different than your own or finding common ground with other people in your groups. So I'm wondering if you could briefly share, what that experience was like in the Pluralist Lab, but then can you tell us a little bit about from your real world experience, whether it's in class or with friends and family or on social media, have you had an opportunity to really utilize these skills, or have you thought, oh, I can use this here. If some kind of conversation comes up that's difficult, or you're talking to somebody that maybe you disagree with on something. So either of you who wants to jump in on that first.
Yeah, I can start. I had really great experiences both times that I went to the Pluralist Lab, whether that was facilitating or participating. Um, it, taught me a lot of different skills that I still use in my day-to-day life, even in conversations that aren't just about, civic discourse. I think for me personally, as like a student sitting in different classes, especially as a sociology major, where you hear a lot of different topics that are real world things. A big fear for like students is getting it wrong and saying the wrong things, feeling judged for I guess your phrasing or your beliefs, and this fear of speaking up often leads to I guess feelings of, I don't know, isolation in classes or something like that. Um, and for me, what's helped me personally in, these real world situations, whether that's in my internship with the Whitburn Center and like attending these events where people do have different political beliefs, or in classroom settings, would probably be creating these spaces where it's okay to be uncomfortable and to ask the messy questions and to treat, I guess, disagreement as a skill rather than a problem. So yeah, that's something that I've taken, especially from the Pluralist Labs and all of the trainings that I've been through.
That's well said. Gabe, how about you?
I enjoy the Pluralist Lab. The sessions that I attended, there wasn't a lot of political disagreement amongst the members themselves. Michael Ford attended one of our questions and he had to play devil's advocate because not a lot of people disagreed with each other on the issues. So that was interesting. I enjoyed the part of the Pluralist Lab where you had to like verbalize the other person's beliefs that you were talking to. Um, and they would say like I couldn't have said it better myself and that type thing. I figured that was a good thing, a good skill to have. Some skills that I found with the Pluralist Lab is attacking people on their ideas and not attacking them personally is something that probably is a good skill that people should have generally. And in the real world, in this past election cycle, I helped a political campaign, and I had to go knock on people's doors and tell them to vote for a certain candidate. And it was sometimes uncomfortable because I didn't want to make the person upset. And not a lot of people have very little patience for you coming up to their door, ringing their doorbell, and asking them questions. So I had to definitely like articulate what I was trying to say in a very short amount of time. And that was probably a skill that the Pluralist Lab kind of gave me because they wanted to move the session along so you couldn't like be really long-winded and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think political campaigning folks, they should all go through a Pluralist Lab or Bridging the Divide training. That's actually a really good point, Gabe. Thank you for that. I think one of the things that speaking of that, and one of the things that comes up here, Liv mentioned this too, is this kind of fear of disagreement. And I'm wondering, and this is for any one of you, in your experience with these initiatives, and maybe Mike, for all of you, but Mike, to bring you back in, what have you seen that you think is most effective for creating spaces where either fear or discomfort is kind of something that is embraced a bit more? And I think, Liv, how you said it, not a problem necessarily, but something that you can confront to really take part in these difficult conversations. Any insight for folks on what you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, I think something again to our advantage and what I spoke about at the beginning of how we sort of run Bridging the Divide is that it's student-led student participation, right? So it's a way to get into the conversation. There's no grade attached, there's no report attached, right? Like it's just a conversation, right? And I think that really helps people sort of get there. I didn't mention this about our discussion guides, but the ones that we use now, and we've really been working them all towards this, is that we set the first page up with just some information about the topic because we've learned some students that come into the conversation, it could be about the Supreme Court, honestly not knowing anything about the Supreme Court. Like they've admitted, like, I learned today that Supreme Court justices have lifetime appointments. Okay, well, I'm concerned about your high school civics, right? But at least you learned that now, right? So we're setting them up with some information. So even if they don't know anything, they can start to engage in the conversation a little bit. So I think those are a couple things that are really, really highly important. Um, Also, that idea of food and easy icebreakers, like just get into it a little bit, have some conversation, chat with your peers a little bit to get things started before you're kind of diving into it as well. And then setting up some really good ground rules that create a space of non-judgment. So we have all of our students do that. We give them some to do that, but we tell them this is a place for conversation and listening and learning. You don't have to change your mind. That's totally fine. But we want you to hear each other a little bit in the conversations. And I think that's really worked effectively for this. And I've heard some students share things that they've learned by participating in some of these conversations as well. And to give you a really good example of like how far I think they can get at times, we were having a group talk about the abortion and lots of things related to that. And when we're asking them to reflect on what they learned or what they heard at the conversation, one of our young men stood up, who I know is a right-leaning conservative student, and he said, I learned today that some women miss their periods sometimes for a month, 2 months, or 3 months. I never knew that. And now I understand why some of the short-term abortion policies that are going through are really, really challenging. I just had no clue. Right. So it's just great that he felt comfortable enough to admit that to a room full of people. So I think we're kind of getting to a good place in how we've structured our events that students feel like this is a place where I can really have a conversation, learn, share, and not be judged.
Wow.
I have something to add there too. Bounce off of Mike. I think that clear and intentional structure makes a really huge difference for students. From a student perspective, when students know like a space is designed for exploration of ideas and not for debate, they show up more authentically, I think, and that's what I've experienced myself. I found that, starting with personal stories, icebreakers instead of opinions, can really open the door for like a deeper conversation. And also I found with the Pluralist Lab, training facilitators not to, guide the discussion, or to guide the discussion with care, can really make sure that people are staying engaged, and even when that conversation is getting a little bit tough.
Great. Devin or Gabe, anything to bounce off?
Sure. I just add on a little bit on just echoing how important framing is and really being intentional at the beginning and making sure the facilitators who are in the room are setting it up so that, well, the three virtues or values that we normally harp on during our framing is we're asking you to come here in a mindset of curiosity, authenticity, and respect. Where we want you to be genuinely curious about why somebody who's, as I was saying, just as smart, sane, well-meaning as you would come to this other conclusion, and being truly curious about what was their calculus in coming to that conclusion. Being authentic and presenting your own opinions, not just not just kind of framing them to be liked by the people in the room, but being authentic to yourself and really trying to lay out why you came to your point of view. And then finally, coming in an attitude of respect as well. Kind of like what Mike said, respect, or I think maybe it was Liv who somebody said something on this effect of coming with respect for the person, even if their ideas kind of seem a little far out there, but understanding that they, as a human being, deserve an equal amount of dignity and respect that you have, and treating that person that way, even if your curiosity about their ideas makes it so that you would never change your mind, but it's at least interesting to understand why somebody who comes to that way of thinking would come to it. And I think, as Mike said, that's another aspect here that's important. We're not trying to change anybody's mind, right? It's just about exercising those civic dialogue muscles that have begun to atrophy in this country, so that we can do a better job of actually understanding each other and actually having mutually intelligible conversations rather than just, either grandstanding or silencing yourself.
Thanks, Devin. Gabe, anything to add?
One really quick thing. I thought something that was interesting was the other people in my group really analyzing the language and the questions that were being posed to them. And they were analyzing the language in a way that sometimes language was too narrow, or sometimes language was too broad, or sometimes it didn't like a word that kept them from voting in a certain direction. I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was very cool that they would do that instead of just voting a certain way, like their political leanings and stuff like that. So I don't know. That's just something that I observed.
Getting back into the nuance and finding some commonality there in that too. I found that too when I participated, that a lot of the discussion would be on digging in to definitions and things like that too. Yeah. This one is, I think, a little bit more for Mike and Devin, but Gabe and Liv, feel free to jump in. Um, you know, I come from a research angle, and so I'm thinking about outcomes with this. So thinking through, how do we measure impact around this? But I imagine, right, it's hard to measure things like curiosity or, right, understanding. And certainly, when people come into these spaces and then go out, right, how do we capture things that have changed in their approach after the fact? But I'm just curious from your perspectives if you can talk a little bit about any type of analysis or outcomes or impact, whether it's kind of, quantitative, qualitative, more squishy, that you can share with us to show like, what this is doing out in the world for people.
Sure. So the Pluralist Lab at this point uses a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures. We love to have focus groups after with students. In the survey that we send a pre and post survey. The post survey leaves space for them to write a little bit about their experience or how they want to use it. And then with our alumni network, we do like to reach out to folks every now and again to say, hey, are you using these skills? Is there any other way that we might be helpful? Can you tell us some stories about different ways that this has been helpful to you? On the quantitative side of things, the pre and post survey, we ask questions in there such as, how would you rate your ability to have a conversation with somebody whose ideas you find to be deeply different from your own, if not potentially dangerous if they voted in a particular way? And then also their willingness to have those conversations as well. Um, and then a third thing that we often talk about, because we've seen the erosion of it over time in this country, is a trust score. Like, how much do you feel like you can trust somebody who disagrees with you on these types of topics? And we found that we tend to get around a 22% or so increase, where somebody might say, I was a 5 coming in and a 7 going out, things like that. We're currently looking into ways that we can do a more um, academic type of scientific qualitative or quantitative assessment of this, looking at campuses that are using these things and those that aren't, looking at those who go through the programming versus those who don't on one campus, to try to get measures of things like, do we see any types of people taking these ideas with them into their communities and then causing it to catalyze a change brought more broadly on their campus? Or if that isn't happening, do we at least see the campuses that are using it are moving in the right direction, whereas those that aren't are staying where they are or actually moving in the opposite direction? We haven't finalized those ideas yet, but that is where we hope to move.
Quick follow-up question for you, Devin, from David Haynes. So he was just wondering how soon after the events do you send out the survey? Do you do it right away, or do you time it out?
It's immediately after. We normally have a QR code that we place in the rooms for the students to fill out the survey immediately after they go through it. And then we're looking at ways to do a more longitudinal type of study to see whether or not these are actually sticky or if it's a halo effect of just going through it. But we're looking at ways that we can be more rigorous with that data. But right now, it's just a pre and a post survey that we have.
Nice. Mike Leader, how about bridging the divide? What kind
Yeah,
of
I have
impact?
tons of data for you, Sam.
Yeah, I
Big
had a
page.
feeling. I've heard.
Well,
Yes.
I can send it to you later. Don't feel like you need to take notes. But I think first, we're looking at numbers, right? So this year, across the 13 UWs, there were 100 Bridging the Divide events, and we had 1,577 participants. So we're starting to get to lots and lots of students, which I think is really, really great. We do have the students doing evaluation of the program immediately following, typically right there before they leave, because otherwise they won't do it. We're mostly assessing the experience, not the learning. So I think that's an area of growth for us to work on. One thing that we'll be doing on our campus at Oshkosh this summer is working with Wicked, our good friends Mike Ford, to create some learning outcomes and assessments around civil dialogue. So that may be something that with time we can bring into Bridging the Divide as well. But overall, our students who participate generally rate the experience as like a 4 or 5 out of a 5-point scale. So it seems like they really like it. Um, some other ways to show effectiveness. We've had 16 campus leaders this past spring. They all gained skills in leadership, budgeting, planning, and civil discourse facilitation. Those are all really great wins. Each of the campus leaders has to complete, and they always complete a post-event report that gets sent to me, and then they complete an end of the year report, which I think they've all completed now at this point, sort of to see what they've learned over the course of their experience. And just to share a quote from one of them, this comes from our student at Superior. I've also realized that civil discourse isn't just a skill, it's a mindset. It's about choosing curiosity over judgment and being intentional about building community across differences. Whether I'm leading a student org, mentoring a peer, or planning an event as an RA, I now see dialogue as a powerful tool for connecting and change. The role has taught me that even small conversations can have a big impact, and that's when we lead with empathy and authenticity. We help create a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. So I think those students who are leading the program are really, really getting it, which is great. Other things that we've seen at UW Oshkosh here, one faculty member liked the experience so much that he continued to run it with his class on his own. At UW Eau Claire, we have our friend from UW, our faculty mentor from UW Eau Claire on the call today. They've really done the best job at developing what I call groupies for Bridging the Divide. They have consistent students coming every single event because they enjoy being involved in those conversations on the regular, and that's really, really kind of cool. I recently received this message from the campus leader at UW Stout, and she received it from a faculty member who had it from a student who reflected on it by participating in their class. It was sent from a student who early in the semester discussed in a discussion post stated, "I'm a conservative, so none of these ideas matter to me. But I decided to go to their Let's Talk About It event with an open discussion about gun control, equal rights, and religion. In the discussion, we sat at tables in groups of 4 or 5. We had a very diverse table. It was filled with someone who was in a trans relationship, someone who owned guns, and some who didn't. Most of us were Catholic, but we had one atheist. I personally really enjoyed this open discussion. It was super cool to see the different perspectives and ideas that came from each other. It was interesting to see how we all had different but similar answers due to backgrounds and how we were raised and what we grew up around. After attending this specific open discussion as my first discussion at UW Stout, it's opened the possibility of me showing up for another. I wouldn't mind coming to other open discussions. To voice my opinions, but two, to also hear and understand others on campus. Side note, he had about 6 tacos and 12 cookies, and the food was a 10 of 10, right? So all that stuff matters, but I think, there's lots of sort of anecdotal evidence to show that bridging the divide is working across the campuses.
Wow, what a great quote. And I just think about, right, when else would a student like that have the opportunity to sit at a table with other
Yeah.
students from those backgrounds? So wow. I think that brings me to a question back for Gabe and Liv, for our students. I'm wondering this is kind of, these activities are kind of extracurricular in some ways, right? And so I'm wondering, if you can talk a little bit about one, either like ideas you have for bringing more students in, to participate in these types of activities, like ideas, ways to incentivize, ways to share, that you think that we could all adopt more. But also, like, I'm curious from your perspectives, what more could faculty do to bring these types of skills or types of experiences, to you rather than you coming to it? If either of you have ideas for that.
Yeah. Um, in my opinion, I think that faculty and staff are really critical in, modeling civic dialogue, and creating the space for conversations, inside and outside of the classroom. So that could be, for example, assignments that require, perspective taking different on perspectives and community-based learning. And group reflection have all been very transformative for me specifically, especially like even though the Pluralist Lab wasn't a class or anything like that, but every time that I've participated in the Pluralist Lab, I've said afterwards, like, I think everyone should take one of these. I think everyone should be involved in this. And so bringing in community partners potentially like WISACT, to show students like how these skills can, I guess, apply beyond campus could be very transformative. Maybe, integrating this work into curriculum that could really amplify its effect that it's having on the participants. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Liv. Gabe, what are your thoughts?
I remember when I said during the Pluralist Lab, like closing thoughts, that it would be good if like you brought like other members of the public in besides students. I think it would be a good thing to do for just the general public. Try to attract different students. I think you would like Olivia said, to put in the curriculum. I think it would be a good idea. This might sound silly, but one of the reasons why I wanted to do it is because I wanted to get the $150 gift card that was promised.
It's real. It's real.
Maybe increasing the money for that or would attract more students, because I know all students would probably like the $150 gift card to buy things like gas or food or something like that. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to do it.
Yeah, I think that, Devin, can you comment on that? I know that there's kind of been a variety of incentives like that. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends on the campus. Some campuses, the culture on the campus is, well, nobody's going to show up if we don't offer some type of monetary incentive. Other campuses are like, no, we want this to be completely voluntary. We don't want people who are just coming in order for a quick payday. And so it's really been a campus by campus, community by community type of thing, feeling it out with the different partners that we have there, whether or not it's going to be something that's appropriate for that particular group. Um, but it's just on the idea of having it in classes. We've also had a couple of people who have adapted it to be used with much larger groups of people, that we have a write-up on if anybody's interested on trying to deploy some of the Pluralist Lab methodology in their class as well. And that's one where you're not paying them, but at the same time, they're there for a grade, so they do have to show up. So.
And
Um,
off of Devin too, I think something that I learned really like majorly from the Pluralist Lab and from the Mercatus Academy specifically was building your civic muscles and like learning what that was. Because for me, when I went in and I heard Devin for the first time say like, let's build our civic muscles, I was very confused and I didn't really know what that was. And now I am walking away like realizing that that is, building the skills and habits that we need to function in a pluralistic democracy. And, which is things like empathy, resilience, learning why someone else would think the way that you don't think. And I've seen, how students build these muscles in the programs firsthand from facilitating with the Pluralist Lab. And you can see, conversations and people shifting from frustration to understanding, and just by like simply listening or openly like rephrasing a question, it can make all the difference. And, those small little things can become like really powerful.
I love that phrase, Liv, from frustration to understanding. I think that's a really great way of putting it, because it can be so easily to get frustrated with these types of conversations if you've never really exercised those civil dialogue muscles before, and you're mostly used to rage baiting online or just trolling people or just censoring yourself because you don't want to be trolled or rage baited. But like building up that resilience, as you said, to not get emotionally hijacked and to also not fall into the trap of being a troll yourself, because it's just easier to try to make somebody angry rather than to actually try to understand what they're actually saying.
All right. Well, thank you all. I think that I'm going to throw out maybe just one more question, and then I want to give enough time for all of the folks that joined us today to ask some questions of all of you. But I'm just curious if you could offer, each of you has kind of touched on this a bit, but some advice. So, based on your experiences and your expertise with this, what advice would you offer to either students or, educators or organizers, folks on maybe other campuses or in the community who would like to start a similar program or maybe get more involved in this type of work on their campus?
I'll jump in. I think it's always smart to start small, sort of where you can control it to see what happens. I think that's what has happened with Bridging the Divide. When Ruth learned of this program, she started it just at UW-Madison, just with the law students, like see how it worked, right? Then we launched it on 4 campuses and sort of saw how it worked with different, when we sort of have less control all of a sudden, right? And we learned some lessons, and then launched it to the 13 campuses and again learned some lessons. So you'll evolve your program if you can sort of start small and control it a little bit as you go. But also don't be afraid to try. I think people are hungry to have conversations, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. But I think they're willing to have them. And when it's face to face, it tends not to get as heated as maybe you think it's going to. But also lean into the difficult conversations with humility and grace. You don't need to know the answers. You need to be willing to try and willing to step into it a little bit. If everyone has that idea and that mentality, you can get through it pretty well.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, this always reminds me of the phrase, it's hard to hate close up. It's hard to stay stuck when you're face to face with someone. And so I think there's just such powerful work that you all are doing. Other ideas from folks on a kind of key advice for other people that might want to start something like this or get involved?
I'd agree with Mike and just echo the fact that smart scaling matters, to make sure things are actually sustainable. But on the more philosophical end of things, I think there are maybe 2 pieces of advice I'd say here. Number one, talk to strangers. Danielle Allen has this great book called Talking to Strangers, where she talks about how over the last couple of decades, we've kind of made it taboo and we say, oh, don't talk to strangers, which stranger danger can be a real thing, especially when you're young. But when you grow up with that type of mindset of like, oh, I shouldn't talk to my neighbors, right? I shouldn't talk to the other people in the elevator with me. I shouldn't talk to the other people on the bus. I'm going to be annoying, or they might attack me or something else. It creates a very isolating culture. So I think talk to strangers is one of those things there. Get out of your bubble, talk to people who you wouldn't normally have a conversation with, and you'll be surprised how much you have in common. And where you don't have things in common, it can be very interesting if you go with a curious mindset to understand where they're coming from. Um, and a second piece there that's probably connected is don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I think for a lot of K through 12 going through the public school system myself, you never wanted to say, I don't know to the teacher, or you never wanted to admit that you didn't know something. And I think that's one of um, the most important things is to be willing to say, oh, I don't know, I'd have to look into that, or say, well, what are your thoughts on that before simply trying to to state an opinion as if it is fact.
All right, thanks, Devin. Gabe and Liv, if you could give any advice, and maybe it's also, to a student who's skeptical, who wouldn't want to participate in something like this, what advice would you give for someone in that space?
Yeah, I think if you're, I was thinking more of like a student, trying to start something like this, especially like me and Gabe, we've participated in these things a little bit, so we have that experience. But there's students out there who, don't want to jump in. And I think that if you are, a student that's trying to start something like this, I think that it's important to remember that you don't need to be an expert to make a difference. I think that that's really important and something that I had to learn. Going into rooms full of, people that are older than me, I had a bit of hesitancy, I guess, at first when I started. But I've learned, what matters is creating a space where people feel safe to be honest and, have that dialogue even if they do disagree. So I agree with what Mike said right off the bat, starting small, having a conversation, bringing a few people together that, don't have the same ideas. And just asking, good questions that might need to be rephrased is okay. And programs like, WISACT and the Pluralist Lab have really showed me that civic dialogue isn't about agreeing, it's about learning to sit with difference and, without walking away from a conversation. So, using resources that already exist is important. I feel like me and Sam, I feel like we did that with the Pluralist Lab, bringing it here, we wanted to do something similar. And I think that using resources that already exist, leaning into people like Devin or, Mike or other people who are already doing this type of work is important because, you'd be surprised how many people are probably, wanting to have a deeper conversation. They're just waiting for somebody to invite them into that conversation.
That's a good point too, the invitation, because I agree. I think I've seen over the last several months, especially, people are hungry to have conversation. So I think that's good for all of us to know and to lean into. Gabe, I'm going to give you the final word here before we open it up to questions. Any advice you'd like to share?
For myself, when the Pluralist Lab first started, I was a little like hesitant to first start talking because there's a people of a wide variety of backgrounds and a lot more life experience than I have when I attended the Pluralist Lab. And I would probably say, I know it can be scary to start talking, but you just gotta like do it, and people aren't gonna judge you no matter what opinion that you have, as long as you don't say something like overly terrible. Um, but yeah, you just probably have to do it, and you tend to just like go with the flow and just of the conversation, and then it'll work out fine. But it can be intimidating at first. That's what I would give the students that want to attend.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. All right, well, we have about 8 minutes left. So I'm happy if anybody wants to raise their hand, come on camera, ask a question, or hit it in the chat. We've thrown a lot at our panelists. They've given us a lot. So any questions? Question here from Alex. Alex says, are you looking to eventually help people develop the skills for exploring options for addressing concerns and building on common ground? So that might be either for maybe Devin or Mike.
Uh, yes. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Devin. Go ahead.
sorry. Um, yes. I mean, I think it's something that we're already trying to do with our current format, but something that we're looking at building out and hope to launch next year, is a fellowship program, that would help students with strategic planning, also potentially some funding possibilities for students who are looking to develop not just the civil dialogue muscles that we've been talking about, but also more civil society muscles more broadly. One of our underlying assumptions or theories for why we're in the state that we're in right now, kind of goes back to the idea of a Putnam bowling alone type of idea of we're losing a lot of the civil society organizations and spaces in our society that at one time brought people together from very different points of view. But because they had this thing that they were working on together, they were able to have reasonable conversations and be able to hear from different points of view without cutting that person out of their life because they still have this thing that they liked doing together. Um, and as fewer people join things like Kiwanis, Lions clubs, it's things like that, but there's been a gap of like the next generation of people not necessarily building the things that would need to take their place. And so we're hoping with this new fellowship program to be a combination of intellectual development with reading groups looking at important different schools of thought that are at play in the world today, but also a practical element of trying to build something on their campus or in their community, or if they've graduated in their workspace, where they could actually put something together with our help in strategic planning and also potentially with some funding to really rebuild those civil society muscles more broadly.
That's
Great.
great.
Yeah, I would say we're not doing anything specific towards that, except, I think folks who come through our program gain a lot of those skills, but then, ours is a student-run program, so that'd be beyond the scope of what we train our campus leaders to do. But the goal would be that hopefully they're partnered in or networked somewhere else on their campus. So like at Oshkosh, then come to the Center for Civic Engagement or the Whitburn Center, right? At Eau Claire, go to the Menard Center, right? Where maybe there's some other folks doing this kind of work. So be making those connections for the next level of work.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? David, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just curious from all the panelists. We often hear that younger people in particular don't have a deep knowledge of civics, of how our government or political system works. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm wondering if you've noticed that in your work, and is there a space for building those civic muscles in terms of just sheer knowledge that we also need to think about?
I wouldn't disagree, and I think Mike's example earlier of not knowing how long a Supreme Court justice was appointed for is an important example of that, but it really does run the gamut. I think I'm all for more civic education, but I think there's also a personal responsibility aspect to this as well, because there are people who have taken the time to learn these things, whether that was actually paying attention in their civics class or it was them learning it on their own. So while we focus on the more soft skills around how to have these conversations, I do think you're right that there is a place for other organizations that are just helping people understand the checks and balances of our system to begin with and understanding the different rules and regulations and the way the Constitution works and the way that their state constitution works. Like, even if you've read the federal Constitution, many fewer students have read their state constitution or understand the way that local boards and like different committees at the local level really operate in a city or a county.
Thanks,
Yeah, I think
Devin.
that's
Go
one
ahead,
of the
Mike.
reasons we've tried to sort of front load our discussion guides with some additional information, and when possible, include some links to other um, good quality sources as well, so we can sort of provide some of that additional stuff. I think it'd be hard to include any more civic education sort of in a general education program either. It's jam-packed already, unfortunately. So as a campus, how can we do these other types of events and programs that provide some of that when and where possible?
And I really like that Bridging the Divide does that in their events. They, lay out the ground basics of what the topic's about. I think one of the challenges, especially for younger people, is that we often, haven't been taught the full picture of civics. We might, be encouraged to get involved or make a difference, but we're not really sure like how the systems work or how change can actually happen. And I feel like that gap can make, civic engagement feel confusing or even, sort of performative in a way, if that makes any sense. So I really like that, programs like Bridging the Divide aren't just, building those civic muscles, I guess, but also, helping understand the material, I guess, yeah, the material or structures that we're working within. So I think that, there's a real need for spaces like that where we're not just asked, to care about, we're not just asked to care, but to actually like understand what's going on and how to engage in a way that's, informative and, sustainable.
Yeah, this is really important. And Mike Ford, I know that you put this in the chat, but could you give us a live plug for the October 4th event?
I'll be quick because I'm literally going to a planning meeting with them in 30 seconds. So we are partnering with the Jack Miller Center. Wicked is as part of because part of Wicked's mission in our strategic plan is to have outreach into K-12 education as well. It's just an unrealized part of our mission. So in the fall, in October, we're hosting a summit for about 50 high school teachers across the state of Wisconsin in Wausau. That will be focused on teaching foundational civics. And I think it's more going to be a check-in and see what's working and what's not working in the eyes of teachers and some high school administrators. And I'm hoping it'll be a nice kind of foundational point to see where progress can be made and where we can be useful. So
Great. Thanks, Mike.
yeah, no, thank you. And thank you all. I have to go now.
Yeah, thanks for fitting that in. I also saw a question, and I know that we're here right at the top of the hour, but from Governor Scott McCallum, at what level of education should civic education occur?
I think it was just partially answered as I typed it in.
Okay. On the
But
same,
there may be some differing. I mean, from what I heard was high school would be the ideal age group to learn this.
yeah, I
But
mean,
then I'm sure you'd say the same thing about remedial reading, which takes place in the university campuses as well. So yeah.
that's true. Well, and Mike Leader said all levels. I think you might have some biased people here that think it should maybe happen as much as it can. But I'll also just quick share. We're working on trying to create something similar at UWO next year, kind of a civics education 1 credit program where we're working with local city and county government folks to kind of bring these things to life for students in a way. So we're not just having them read about it, but actually going out and visiting facilities and talking with folks about it. Rebecca.
Hi,
Hi.
thanks so much. I just want to thank all of you for your comments because I've thoroughly enjoyed listening. I got on a little late. I am actually a village manager in a municipality and was interested in kind of the topic and how you were discussing this. And I think that I'm interested in learning more and how we can make this a part of community discussions, primarily when there are larger policy issues that need to be reviewed and how to kind of go about having those discussions so we can bring back good feedback to people who are making policy. So if there is a way that I can learn more, and I see in the chat, Devin, I will reach out to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for coming. For sake of time, I don't want to push anybody too much further past. I think I'll hand it back over to Lisa Lewis to have the last word, but just thank you all. Thank you to our panelists again for being here. Thanks to all of you for being here for our first joint session. I think it came together well. And Lisa, I'll let you close us off today.
Okay, thank you to everyone for coming. If you have any further questions, you can email the Whitburn Center at whitburncenter@uwosh.edu. And we also invite you to join us for June's virtual Whitburn plus WISAC Wednesday event titled The Power of Us, Social Capital Across Wisconsin. We will send out a date and more details in the near future. So thank you to everyone for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.